they are here to talk to us about the Wood River Project. They've been involved in it since the conception. Suzanne was one of the founders, and now she works as a coordinator, where Larry was the county commissioner in the county while this was happening. And I'm going to hand this over to Larry, and he's going to kind of do a self-introduction through this. So here he is.
Thank you very much, Randy. I want to talk to you all for a couple minutes. First thing I want to do, though, is thank Randy, thank Commissioner Strasser and Jackson County, thanks to Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the U.S. Department of Agriculture, all you folks. And to be honest, most of all, I want to thank those of you who are producers out there who've taken a little bit of a risk to take some of your time to come here today. When I speak to folks, I like to know a little bit about them. We're from out of town. So I'm kind of curious, like, how many of you folks are sheep producers? Humor me here, so let's see some hands. How many folks are doing cattle operations of one kind or another? Okay, most of that. How many are doing both? I know there's a couple. Okay, some are doing both. How many are grazing at least part of your operation on public lands? Okay, most of it. So is it fair to say then a lot of the operations that are represented in the room are on private lands, strictly private lands? Are some of you smallholders also? Any smallholders here? Yeah, a few smallholders. So horses and other animals, sheep, goats, and that kind of thing, right? Yeah, okay, very good. All right, so Suzanne is going to talk about, so when we say the Wood River Valley, we're talking about the Big Wood River in south central Idaho, right on the edge of some of the most expansive wildlands in the lower 48. Wolves came to us in the mid 2000s. Suzanne's going to talk about some of the details of her project. Why I was invited. I was a county commissioner there for 12 years, and I own a farm. And actually, interestingly, I've dealt a lot with depredation because I have a resident elk herd of up to 300 head, and I've filed some pretty substantial depredation claims with the state of Idaho. But I want to talk to you about how you do this in the community sense, because Blaine County, Idaho is a little bit of a microcosm. It's sort of a scaled down version of Oregon. It's an international destination resort community, and we have many people in our community who are very conservation oriented. But we also have a long tradition of agriculture and ranching, farming and ranching, and we really honor that part of our community. And often the folks from those generally described, those backgrounds, don't always see things the same way. Coming from different perspectives, different interests, different values. And one of the challenges you have is how do you find common ground? How do you work together? And how do you meet the goals of people who have different value sets? And that is, in essence, the inception of the Wood River Wolf Project, as we call it, which was a project to protect sheep grazers on public lands north of the cities of Ketchum and Sun Valley from wolf depredation, to keep the livestock alive, but also to keep the wolves alive. So you really have to kind of keep both those ideas in mind. We want to keep the wolves. We've talked a lot about wolves here today, and we're interested in conserving the wolf, but we're also interested in conserving the agricultural community and helping the livestock producers to do what they do and allow the values of both ends of our community to thrive. So my county, before I became a commissioner, I was elected in 2006. Before I became a commissioner, because of some of the political feelings in the community, and it's done a little differently in Idaho, my county said to Wildlife Services And we have animal control units. We don't do it so much by county. We do it by animal control districts. We said, we as a county are not going to continue funding lethal control because we don't like some of the practices, the cyanide canisters and the aerial gunning and that kind of thing. So we're not going to give our money as a county to the Animal Damage Control District anymore, those types of activities. And along came a gentleman, and you'll meet him in Suzanne's presentation, who was with Wildlife Services, who had been approached by a sheep producing outfit that was interested in non-lethal and said, well, hey, Blaine County, would you be interested in supporting non-lethal activities? And that's kind of about when I was a commissioner, and we said, yes, we would be interested in doing that, and that was the inception of my county's involvement and a broader community engagement around non-lethal practices. And so at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Suzanne, and she will tell you the story of our project.
Awesome, thank you. Let's see if this pointer works too. Okay. Yep. Okay, that's all right. We'll see if the thing advances. Good morning. Thank you for inviting us from Idaho to come over to Oregon. We love being here. In fact, I've worked here a lot during my career. Been working the last 30 some odd years now for wolves, and kind of following them as they have come across into Idaho and then into Oregon. I was at the first, actually facilitate the first Oregon Wolf Plan meeting in 1999. So I'm really used to this country, really love working here, really love the people here. So the Wood River Project started in Idaho in 2007. Even though wolves were reintroduced to Idaho in 1995, 1996, it took them a few years, a little over a decade, to get to our area in Blaine County. And when they first showed up, people were excited. We got to see them raising their pups. We had a little mini Yellowstone going on. There were cameras out there, people out there. There was a big brouhaha in the local community about getting a real tourism effort started because we could see them right off of our highway actually raising their pups. And unfortunately, that information hadn't been transferred to the rancher who was coming in with several thousand sheep. And when he pulled his trucks up, right to the spot where wolves were denning with their pups. And within 24 hours, we had dead sheep, a dead livestock guardian dog, and a control order to kill the wolves, which then turned into a major battle within the community. People did not want to see the wolves killed, and other people in the community wanted to see the wolves killed because they wanted to have them out of theirs. Blaine County is has one of the highest concentrations of sheep on public lands anywhere in North America. It is, we call it the sheep superhighway. So we have 15 to 25,000 sheep in our project area, in our region there, every year throughout the grazing season. It's one of the last remaining big sheep operation areas where they travel hundreds of miles over the course of the summer on public land, on very remote, very rugged mountainous terrain. And when the wolves showed up and they had the first depredation occur, the Fish and Wildlife Service's response to that at the time, who was the lead agency managing wolves, said, you're gonna have to kill them because there's no way that wolves are going to be able to exist on this landscape with that many sheep. And so the kill order was, I think, approved. And then once the community bounced back and said, we don't want that to happen, the second response was, well, can we find something we can do to coexist with these wolves? And at that time, there really hadn't been any large landscape level presentations done. So this is the reintroduction occurred in 95, 96. As wolves were coming back that 10 years prior to getting to our community, wolves killed more sheep by far than they did any other type of livestock. By far, more than triple the amount that we lost in terms of cattle losses in the state. The sheep's numbers were always in the hundreds. And I have to put this in context. Even though wolves are on the landscape, they're still one of the lowest reasons for losing livestock. So we had much higher losses continue to coyotes, to birthing problems, to disease and all that sort of thing. But you've got one more factor now on the landscape, which is wolves. And we didn't know really how to address that. And being that they kill more sheep than they do any other type of livestock, we thought that this would be one of the best places we could test. Do non-lethal tools work? And if so, can they work in one of the worst case scenarios in North America? And that's where we started with the basis for our project. So we also have cattle in our area. Cattle and sheep producers around the region have had problems as well. And we were able to help support them through other means like range riders, carcass removal, all that sort of thing. But sheep are particularly vulnerable, and we lose sometimes hundreds, if not thousands of sheep throughout the region, just to coyotes. So it's a really difficult animal to protect from predation. We also looked at the scientific literature at the time, and essentially what it said was, you can't use these non-lethal tools across a large landscape. It doesn't work, it's ineffective, it's going to be too expensive. You know, we heard all of that, and yet we looked hard and found out that nobody really had tried it yet. So we thought, okay, we'll be stubborn, we'll try it. And if it fails, it fails. You can say, I told you so. But if it doesn't, then let's see what does work. This is our area in Idaho. Anybody been to Idaho before? You guys all familiar with the state? Anybody into the Sawtooth National Forest, the Sawtooth Recreation Area, so you know our terrain? It's pretty intense. And this is our 2012 map where the project area is, and I'll get to the success that points out. But this is the dark areas that year, the sheep depredations would have been much larger and had we not had this project in place. We had a lot of skepticism early on. I don't know if you can see the cartoon, but it says basically if you're made out of meat, are really these flags going to work in order to protect, wolf be nice tools? Okay, we'll try it. So we established the Wood River Wolf Project with a minimum of trying to minimize livestock losses throughout the region, throughout the project area, by using these non-lethal tools and techniques, husbandry methods. Those were the goals that we set up. We also set up the first steering committee, which was a model that we developed because we thought it was important not to have just the people that were affected by wolves, but also to have the people who wanted to have them there so they could help share in the burden and trying to figure out how to make this work. And it's also the city and the county, state and federal agencies were involved. So it was really all on hands-on deck type of project. Well, first thing we did is trying to find out where the wolves were living. What were they doing? We didn't know much about them. We didn't have satellite GPS technology back then, so we had to do some of the homework ourselves, and that was just finding out where do wolves live in our area. We'd see them showing up from time to time on trail cameras, but what were they doing the rest of the time? That's important to us because our sheep are going through this area and they're covering hundreds of miles. We don't know when they're going to bump into the next wolf pack accidentally. So finding that information was extremely important. It's our project area there. This is to show you kind of our terrain. What we were able to determine is like where wolves were spending different parts of the summer. Where did they den? Where did they go to rendezvous? And what did they do kind of in between? And how did that overlap with where our sheep rotation grazing routes were at? Another thing that we tried was we knew that having 1 or 2 livestock guardian dogs, which we'd had in the past, was probably not going to be effective. We've read enough of the literature to know that we needed to have probably 3, 4, maybe even 5 dogs per band. A typical band runs about 1,500 sheep, sometimes up to 2,000 or so. And 1 or 2 dogs can't cover that number of sheep. So we immediately started increasing the number of livestock guardian dogs that we had. We use a lot of the big white dogs, typically the Pyrenees, because we have a lot of public that goes through our area. They're recreationists. We don't want to have super aggressive dogs. We want them to stay with the band. They're basically an alarm system more than they are like a frontline defense. So they're there to alert the herders if there's a problem, and they do so by barking. We also looked at things like if wolves are scavengers, which we were seeing from over here in Oregon. We knew that the wolves would go in and scavenge in areas where there was a lot of dead livestock. What did that mean for us? I mean, with sheep operations moving like they are, we leave a lot of dead livestock behind, because the sheep get old and they can't keep up. A lot of them die on the trail. And we didn't know whether or not that would entice wolves to come into the area and then kill more of the sheep. What we did find is that as the sheep bands moved, the wolves might find these carcasses, and we might be able to keep them off of the carcasses, but they didn't seem to then train the wolves to go tracking after the sheep bands. So that was a good thing, learning that early on. This is some of the sheep on some of the foothills. You can see how big this country is, and often the sheep were in areas where they were very vulnerable to predation. We lose a lot to coyotes as well. So would these tools work with coyotes? Would they work with bears, mountain lions? We've got them all, other than grizzly. I think that's the only thing. So one of the things we tried early on was this thing called turbofladry, and I think this was the first large test of turbofladry in defensive livestock anywhere in North America as far as sheep go. And the wolves were denning up in this valley just back behind in this picture, and they spent the next, 45 days essentially in the same meadow systems as the sheep did through the rest of the grazing season, and we didn't have a single loss after that. So we started off with a train wreck, and then in installing this, putting these sheep in the night corrals at night, we were able to stop the predations from happening at that point. It's an unlikely tool, but it seems to work really well with wolves. We also looked at things like, where are wolves, are they getting close? Are they overlapping with us? Are we just getting lucky? Just avoiding wolves out there on the landscape. And what this told us is that, no, we weren't just getting lucky. The wolves were there. In fact, they were rolling in what was left of the sheep moving through that area. And they were definitely part of the system. We were hearing them, we were finding their tracks, and we were even getting photographs of them being in the same spots that sheep had been within less than 48 hours apart. We just weren't losing anymore to them. So a lot of the tools that we use on our project are ones that are going to be discussed in great detail later on today, so I'm not going to go into each of those. But we found, especially over the last 5 years, this is 12 years now that we've been working on this project, over the last 5 years we really haven't used the flattery very much. It's been more about just making sure that human presence was there, that we had adequate number of livestock guardian dogs, that if the sheep were lambing or if they're in a particularly vulnerable area, that we increase the deterrence during that particular time. Air horns, really great thing to use. Just the pop shells, anything that gives them the sense that humans are present and there is just a super important tool to have. And our herders have been incredibly effective. They're probably the most important thing out on the landscape is having the herders there. But they gave us a lot of grief about just setting up wolf discos, because once you put the flattery up and you've got the flashing lights and then you've got the sound, and some of them were even using loud rock music to keep wolves away. We gave away quite a few guitars too, so that they could keep playing while, at night, and those seem to work pretty well as well in addition to it. So we'll try anything. The flattery is a really interesting tool, and I'm hoping that this video is going to work for you, but this is in Washington State, where the wolf had been feeding off of a carcass, a cow carcass. He didn't kill it, but he found it during the middle of winter. Wolves are scavengers as much as they are predators. So this wolf came back and was feeding off this cow carcass, and then was able to, once the flattery was put up, the biologists set up cameras to see what would happen. Essentially, this wolf has come across, a wolf's dream. In the middle of winter, to find something like this is a huge resource for them for food. They could eat off of this for weeks now. But then the wolf came back the next night and found out that there was this weird flattery going around it. And so he comes back, goes around the fence line, comes back at night to see if there's anything going on there, if it might be easier. Well, the flattery's still there, but it's snowing, and watch the snow level as this goes too. We followed the tracks around the outside and the inside of the perimeter. There's no wolf tracks here inside the perimeter, but there's a ton, as you can see, going around the outside. He's back on the second night. He's getting a little bit more aggravated. You can see that tail raised up a little bit, going, yeah, this isn't fun. That's my food in there. Comes back again on day 3. I'm not showing you all the footage because there's a bunch more pictures, video of this, this is very condensed. He ends up coming back 17 or 18 different times over those 3 days. He jumps over the barbed wire fence like it's not even there, but still won't cross the flattery. So in the end, he went 80 miles north, and off he went. So he didn't come back, and we found out that there was some real benefit to the flattery that was more effective than I think we expected early on. Okay, there we go. So with the help of Wildlife Services, USDA Wildlife Services National Research Center out of Fort Collins, Colorado, they helped us look at data on our project from the 15 to 20,000 that were in our project area, the sheep that are moving through, the depredation losses we were having. We looked at what tools we were using over here, and then the adjacent allotments where sheep would leave the project area or just come against it. And they weren't using the non-lethal tools and devices there. And you can see from, well, if you can see the little bitty print on here, we had, during the first 7 years we were collecting that data, we lost 30 sheep to wolves in our project area, whereas they lost over 300 in the area adjacent to us, so 10 times more. Since the 12 years, we just ended our 12th season, or just ending our 12th season this year, we've had 46 sheep killed in our project area in total. And again, 15 to 20,000 sheep in a project area all summer long, so they get exposed to wolves for a long period of time. We've had one wolf killed in the project area, where there's been dozens that have been killed in the adjacent areas, so they rely more on the lethal control than they do on non-lethal. And then over the course of time, our project area more than doubled in size from about 100 square miles out through most of the western side of the valley. We've had other producers asking us to please expand it even beyond that. This is really meant to be a demonstration project, but it ended up turning into a long-term revision of how we're managing for predators in our livestock area. There's a paper out on it. If you'd like a copy, we can sure get one to you. And what we found out was that, first of all, communication is one of the most essential things if you're going to be running an operation like this, or even a small operation, because if we can do this in this kind of territory, this kind of country, with these kind of challenges, we know that you can do this in pretty much any other area. Livestock guardian dogs are essential, except for in the springtime. We don't use the dogs near wolf dens because dogs are funny-looking wolves, and the scariest thing to wolves that have baby pups at the time is strange wolves coming in, and they'll be extremely aggressive about defending their pups during that springtime of the year when they're either at den site or rendezvous. So the livestock guardian dogs can actually backfire and be an attractant rather than a deterrent at that time. So we're careful to not use them without protecting the dogs or getting anywhere too close to the den sites. Removal of dead and dying livestock, that's more important if you're in a stationary area rather than being on the move like we are with these sheep operations. And then, monitoring the wolves, knowing what they're doing. That's one of the most key things about not killing wolves, because in the area next to us, when they killed entire packs of wolves in that area, they didn't know the next year where those wolves are going to show up, because new wolves are going to move in. If wolves find the area attractive enough to make it a habitat, their core territory, new wolves will move in. Even if you kill them time and time again, they're still going to keep coming back. And if you have the same vulnerabilities there in place, you're going to have that same scenario playing out over and over and over again. So what we found is that it's better to interject in the middle, stop that scenario from occurring, and then present it going forward as a way of just coexisting with the wolves so that we have minimal losses, which is what we really hope to achieve. But the only way to know that is if you know the wolves and their behavior, where they're going to den, where they're going to move to rendezvous, what their more predictable patterns are. So lethal control can actually work against you if you're not careful. And then the tools that we use, the flattery, the sound alarms, the lights, those are all really important tools, but they're really, being adaptable about how you use them, not exposing wolves to the same tools over and over again is extremely important. So making sure that you mix them up. And then, of course, just good communication with all of your project partners and having a good model that allows people that, that have very diverse opinions to come together and work toward a common goal, because this model works for everybody. It makes life better for the wolves, it makes life better for the sheep, it makes life better for the community at large. It is a win-win-win all the way across. And the cost of doing it is actually less than the typical cost of what was going on next door to us, where they were using helicopters and airplanes to kill wolves, and they were losing a lot more livestock over there. So their costs were much higher than our costs overall. Funding, and that was one thing that Randy asked me to talk a little bit about. Our funding has come from a lot of different sources. We've had federal funding through NRCS, we've had state assistance. The Forest Service has helped with providing in-kind things like helping our field techs find lodging, providing vehicles at times. So we go out and beg for a lot of different parts of the project's tools and needs. We've had some major funding come in from like Toyota Grants Foundation sent us funding over several years. So there's a lot of people that are excited about this kind of work. Finding funding for it can be one of the easiest parts of it if you go to the right people. I've got a quote from you. Do you want to? I don't normally have you here to be able to share this, but if you can prevent depredations from occurring in the first place, it is the easiest, cheapest way to go about addressing having wolves on the landscape, and it's for certain. We still love our sheep. We have an annual festival, which is coming up in about a month. That if you want to come have fun and see sheep parade through the middle of downtown, we have all kinds of musicians that come out for this. We do a big blessing for the sheep. It's a big deal, and you're most welcome to come and join us, because it's one of the biggest celebrations that we have in the Valley, and it's a ton of fun. These are some of our project partners. If you can see in the picture, the top is the Pioneer Pack female and her pups that survived because of the non-lethal tools that were out there. And the bottom, of course, is one of our livestock guardian dogs and the sheep. They survived because of our tools that were out there. We can't say enough about how effective these tools are and how grateful we are to especially people like this. So Wildlife Services, this is Rick Williamson. I don't know if everyone from Wildlife Services in this room has met him before, but he was our mentor for our project. Lost him a couple years ago. He was just a remarkable part of our project and a great mentor, and really believed in these tools enough to try them in a situation where many people doubted that they would work. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne.
Yeah.
By the way, Rick's wife, Carol, is one of the premier manufacturers of turbo flattery. She actually sews those little flags. We were talking about this last night at dinner, how you put those flags on the electric wire, and she sews it on there. It's a pretty amazing
Hundreds
thing.
of miles of the stuff.
Hundreds of miles of it. I hope that one of the things that you noticed about Suzanne's presentation is there's nothing that was part of her presentation that's prescriptive. Because one of the things that's really important to think about as you all move forward is, how is this going to change what you do? And it's really adaptive. There is not a prescription. One of the things I didn't ask is who operates in the forest, who operates in the sagebrush. There's different landscapes, different terrain. There's so many different conditions that are going to affect what you do and how you do it. And so I think Suzanne did emphasize really well that, in that one photograph of all the tools that are there, she talked about how you mix it up and how you change. And you don't just leave you don't just post the flattery and then walk away and leave it out there for 2 months. That's a prescription for making the flattery ineffective going forward. I want to go back a little bit to how you're going to do this. In Idaho, here I am in Oregon, coming over from Idaho, where there's this great turnout for a meeting like this, and you are establishing tremendous cooperation between the conservation community, the producers, and the agencies who are there interested in supporting all of you. In Idaho, it's really quite different. And actually, we had complaints from our legislature that not enough wolves were being killed. And a lot of ranchers really are resistant to some of these practices because it's a lot easier to pick up the phone and call Fish and Game, who then authorizes a lethal control order, and Wildlife Services picks up the tab for that. There is not the kind of framework that you have here in Oregon for working together. So because you're working together, because you recognize that it's important to work together and that there are different value sets that have to be accounted for, I wanted just to talk briefly about how we went about building that model in our own community. As Suzanne mentioned, when we started, we created a multi-stakeholder steering committee. So this was just in our county. My county, Blaine County, it's bigger than the state of Delaware with 22,000 people. You're trying to do this across a region and across the state. And I think there's value in the ability of people who know each other to get together still across different agencies and having multi-stakeholder groups to share information and expertise. So what we did in Blaine County was we got all the agencies that are represented here today, plus the conservation community, plus the producers, and we listened to each other about what was important and what we thought would work and what didn't work. And we listened actually to ranchers who are operating in different settings and under different conditions, and what were the particular challenges they were facing. Over time, again, I think there's a lot of resistance to adopting some of these practices, and one of the ways that in our project, one of the ways that we overcame resistance was finding ways to add value for the producers, supporting herders in the field. So having field technicians who are proficient in Spanish, supporting herders and the producers in their care of their livestock guardian dogs, providing some assistance with veterinary care and feeding. The herders, in the example that we've given, sheep producers, these guys are up here on H-2A visas, and they're lonely. So having someone that's going out there and helping them, they're out there in the field for several months at a time, having someone from our crew who's out there working with them, spending time with them, showing up at night when wolves' presence is found to be there, we're adding value to them. The producers appreciate it, the herders appreciate it. Certainly the care of the dogs was an important component. But we try to find ways to add value to what they're doing. I know there's so many different elements to this, and we're going to get into, as the later presenters, I think right after me and this afternoon, are going to talk about some of the individual tools and how they're used effectively and how you can adapt to their use in your operations over time. I think what I want to kind of finish on is, we're not here to preach to you or tell you how to do this. You have to find your own way. The one thing that we can share with you is our story and give you evidence that these practices can work, these tools can work if used effectively. And it is possible to work together with people who you may not agree with to try to find ways to support each other. It involves changes, it involves not just the use of things like lights and flags and noisemakers, but it also fundamentally affects different characteristics of your animal husbandry practices. You have different species of animals, different breeds of animals with different behaviors. You have different predators that behave differently. Again, I just come back to this notion of listening and learning from each other and adapting to the changes. And frankly, I think you'll find, and there are many more people better qualified than I to speak to this, that over time, the behavior of your animals, your herd animals, will change with you. And this is, I think there are many examples of this. Again, don't take it from me, but I think you'll learn this as you go along. A couple of, I just want to go back on a couple of key elements. The value of communications and sharing information. You saw, so in Idaho now, and I'm guessing this is true in Oregon as well, tracking information is no longer shared. So what happened in our case was, there was a picture that Suzanne showed of a track guy out with a tracking device. Hunters and people who didn't want to see wolves in our area, they started asking Fish and Game, Idaho Fish and Game, for tracking devices too, because they wanted to find wolves for their own reasons. And so Fish and Game said, you know what, we're not going to share this with anybody. But what we have done in our project area is put up trail cameras. We have people out on the ground. We share information. Hikers will, a lot of this is Forest Service or BLM allotments. Those agencies are willing to share with information. So people are aware that wolves are in the area. And among the project cooperators, we share this kind of information. Good communications between herders and the people they work for, as well as our project technicians, when they need help. When they think they're running into trouble, or when they've heard wolves howling at night, so that somebody could come out and assist them. We as a county, I was liaison to this project for my county. We did little things like, for example, allowing for free carcass disposal at our waste transfer stations, so that nobody would feel like, we had one incident one year with in an area on a ranch well outside our project area. Not someone who was working with us specifically, who lost a lot of sheep, that person was concerned about the cost of taking those carcasses, and we just said, we'll do, from now on we're going to take these for free. I guess I see Randy over here.
Yep.
Your extension curricula on animal husbandry can begin to incorporate these things, and this becomes part of normal practice and normal life. And as you go forward, I think it will get easier as you go. So thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you, guys.